off without the knowledge of the Athenian embassy. So when Aristides next day resumed his reproachful strain, they answered with mocking laughter, that he was talking nonsense and was asleep, for that the army was by this time at the tomb of Orestes in its march against the strangers 22. By strangers they meant the Persians. To this Aristides answered that it was a sorry jest to have received their friends instead of their enemies. These particulars are relayed by Hymenius, but in the decree of Aristides for 7 ambassadors it is not his name, but those of Timon, Xanthippus, and Irenaeus that are mentioned. Sight. He was elected general with unlimited powers.
We're going to see what happens. I'm definitely trying to make mine 4 o'clock tomorrow. So, in this session, I'm going to try to make it all the way till I go to sleep.
On account of its enormous size, it was not contained in a fortified camp, but a quadrangular wall was constructed around the baggage and most valuable material. Each side of this square was 10 furlongs in length. Tisamenus of Us, the prophet, now told Pausanias and all the Greeks that they would win the victory if they stood on the defensive and did not attack. Aristides sent to Delphi, and received a response from the oracle, that the Athenians would conquer if they prayed to Zeus, to Hera of Kithaeron, and to Pan of the nymphs Sphagitides, and if they sacrificed to the heroes Androcrates, Leucon, Lysander, Democritus, Hyption, Ectaeum, and Polyus, and if they would fight in their own territory, in the plain of Demeter of Eleusis and her daughter. This oracle greatly disturbed Aristides. The heroes to whom he was bidden to sacrifice are the original founders of the city of Plad, and the cave of the nymphs called Sphagitides is on one of the peaks of Kithaeron, looking towards the front where the sun sets in summer. It is said that there was formerly an oracle there, and that many of the people became possessed, and were called Nympholepidus to the tongue of the Eleusinian Demeter, and the promise of victory to the Athenians if they fought in their own country. This meant no less than to recall them to Attica and forbid their taking any further part in the war. Whilst Aristides was thus perplexed, Arinestus, the general of the Plataeans, saw a vision in his sleep. In his dreams he thought that Zeus the preserver appeared and inquired of him what the Greeks had decided to do, and that he answered, Lord, tomorrow we shall lead away the army of Eleusis, and fight the Persians there, according to the oracle. Upon this the god answered, that they had missed the meaning of the oracle, for the places mentioned were near Plad, where they themselves were encamped, and if they saw they would find them. Arinestus, after this distinct vision, awoke. He at once sent for the oldest and most learned of the citizens of Plad, and after debating the matter with them, discovered that near Pugini, Hysia under Mount Kithaeron, stood a very ancient temple, dedicated to the Eleusinian Demeter and her daughter. He immediately took Aristides with him and proceeded to the spot, which was excellently placed for the array of an infantry force in the presence of an overwhelming cavalry, because the spurs of Mount Kithaeron, where they run down into the plain by the temple, render the ground impassable for cavalry. Close by is the chapel of Hero Androcrates, in the midst of a thick matted grove of trees. In order, however, that the oracle might in no way be affected by his promise of victory, Arinestus proposed, and the Plataeans decreed, that the boundary marks of their territory on the side towards Attica should be removed, and the country given to the Athenians, so that they might fight in their own land for Greece, according to the oracle. This noble act of the Plataeans became so famous in later times, that, many years afterwards, Alexander the Great himself, when he had conquered all Asia, caused the walls of Plata to be rebuilt, and made proclamation at the Olympian Games by a herald, that the king bestowed this honor upon the Plataeans in memory of their magnanimous conduct in giving up their territories, and measuring their lives on behalf of the Greeks in the Persian war. XII. A controversy arose between the Athenians and the men of Phrygia about their respective places in the line of battle. The Tebans argued that if the Lacedaemonians had the right wing, they obtained posted on the left. And they spoke at great length about the achievements of their ancestors, as entitled them to that honor. The Athenians were vexed at their pretensions, but Aristides says, because it is not suitable to speak with the figures of our bravery. But to you, men of Sparta, and to the rest of the Greeks, we say that a particular coast neither confers courage nor takes it away, but that in whatever part of the line you may think fit to place us, we will endeavor so to array our ranks and fight the enemy as not to inherit the honor which we have gained in former battles. We did not come hither to quarrel with our allies, but to fight the enemy.
Alright, so we won that round.
But to fight bravely for Greece. PG 81, the coming struggle will clearly show to all the Greeks the real worth and value of each
Sorry about that. A little bit jumpy. I've got a
council of generals heard the speech. They allowed the claim of the Athenians, and gave up the left wing to them. XIII. While the cause of Greece was thus trembling in the balance, and Athens was especially in danger, certain Athenians of noble birth, who had lost their former wealth,
please don't kill me,
their influence in the city, being unable to bear to see others exalted at their expense, met in secret in a house in Plata and entered into a plot to overturn the free constitution of Athens. If they could not succeed in this, they pledged themselves to ruin the city and betray it to the Persians. While these men were plotting in the camp, and bringing many over to their side, Aristides discovered the whole conspiracy. Afraid at such a crisis to take one decisive step, he determined, while carefully watching the conspirators, yet not at once to seize them all, not knowing how far he might have to proceed if he acted according to strict justice. From all the conspirators he arrested 8. 2 of these, who would have been the first to be put on their trial, Hines of Lambra, and Aegitus of Charna, made their escape out of the camp, and Aristides pardoned the others, as he wished to give an opportunity to those who believed themselves unsuspected, to take courage and repent. He also hinted to them that the war afforded them a means of clearing themselves from any suspicion of disloyalty by fighting for their country like good men true. XIV. After this, Mardonius made trial of Grecian courage, by sending the whole of his cavalry, in which he was much the stronger, to attack them where they were, all except the Megarians, encamped at the foot of Mount Kithaeron, in an easily defended rocky country. These men, 3,000 in number, were encamped nearer the plain, and suffered much from the attacks of the horsemen, who surrounded them on all sides. They sent a messenger in great haste to Pausanias, begging him to send assistance, as they could not by themselves resist the great numbers of the barbarians. Pausanias, hearing this, PG 82, and seeing the camp of the Megarians overwhelmed with darts and arrows, while the defenders were huddled together in a narrow compass, knew not what to do. He did not venture to attack cavalry with a heavy army, only infantry, but offered it as an opportunity to win praise and honor to the generals who were with him, that they should volunteer to wait upon the Arians in their extremity. All hesitated, but Aristides claimed the honor for the Athenians, and sent the bravest of his captains, Olympiodorus, with 300 picked men, besides some archers. As they quickly got into array and charged at a run, Lysisus, the leader of the enemy, a man of great bodily strength and beauty, seeing them, wheeled round his horse, and rode to attack them. They sustained his attack and closed with his horsemen, and a sharp struggle took place, both parties fighting as though the issue of the war depended on their exertions. The horse of Lysisus was at length wounded by an arrow through his rider. Encumbered by his armor, Lysisus was too heavy for his own men to carry him away, but also was protected by it from the stabs of the Athenians who fell upon him, for not only his head and breast, but his limbs also were protected by brass and iron. Someone, however, drove this like Cavalier and his spear through the eyeball of the helmet, and then the rest of the Persians abandoned the body and fled. The Greeks discovered the importance of their exploit, not from the number of the dead, or that he had fallen, but from the lamentations of the enemy. They cut off their own hair, and made of their horses and mules, in sign of mourning for Lysisus, and filled the whole plain with weeping and wailing, having lost a man who for courage and high position was second only to Mardonius himself. XB. After this cavalry action, both the parties remained quiet for a long time, for the soothsayers foretold victory both to the Greeks and to the Persians if they fought in self-defense, but foretold defeat if they attacked. At length Mardonius, as he only had provisions for a few days longer, and as the Greek army kept growing stronger by the continual reinforcements which it received, to turn PG-83, mind, sorely against his will, to delay no longer, but to cross the Asopus at daybreak and fall upon the Greeks unexpectedly. In the evening he gave orders to his captains to this effect. About midnight, a solitary horseman rode up straight to the Greek camp. He bade the gunner sent with Aristides the Athenian, who was at once lost, when the stranger spoke as follows. I am Alexander of Macedon, and I have come hither at the greatest risk to myself to do you a service, for fear you should be taken by surprise. Mardonius will attack tomorrow, not because he has any hope of success, but because he is destitute of provisions, although the soothsayers all forbid him to fight because the sacrifices and oracles are unfillable, and the army is disheartened. Thus he is forced to put all on a venture, or else to starve if he remains quiet. When he had said this, Alexander begged Aristides to keep the secret to himself, and communicate it to no one else. Aristides, however, answered that it would not be right for him to conceal it from Pausanias, who is commander-in-chief. Before the battle he said that he would keep the secret from everyone else, but that if Greece was victorious, all men should know the good service so bravely rendered by Alexander. After these words the king of Macedon rode away, and Aristides, proceeding to the tent of Pausanias, told him the whole matter. He then sent for the other generals, and ordered them to keep the troops under arms, as the battle was expected. XBI.
Sass me, will ya?
Herodotus tells us, Pausanias asked Aristides to remove the Athenians who left to the right wing, so as to be
no thanks to me.
Only found that they would be better able to contend with them, because they understood their mode of fighting, and were confident because they had beaten them once before, while he with the Spartans would take the left wing of the army, where he would be opposed to those Greeks who had taken the Persian side. Most of the Athenian generals thought this Basilius was shot in the butt, that he should leave all the other Greeks in their place, and march them backward and forward like Hellas, only to place them opposite the PG-84, bravest troops of the enemy. Aristides, however, said that they were entirely mistaken, for a few days before boys, we'll lock the shadow in. Being posted on the left wing, and had been delighted when they obtained it. But now, open fire! Bullets bound to get him! And some sort offered them the post of honor in the whole army. They were not delighted at it. Trying to shoot the shadow. The advantage it was to have to fight against foreign barbarians. Open the door, boys! You locked the shadow out! The Athenians cheerfully exchanged places with the Lacedemonians, and much talk went on among them as each man reminded his comments that the Persians who would come to attack them were no braver, nor better armed than those whom they had defeated at Marathon. See, that's what happens when you get mad. The same embroidered robes and gold ornaments on their feminine bodies. Marco Payne, the only person who knows whom the voice of the invisible shadow belongs. Thank heaven you're all right. Ow! As our Greeks do, in defense of our city and territory, but for the trophies of Marathon and Salamis, lest the battle of Marathon should be thought to have been won more by Miltiades' fortune than by the valor of the Athenians. With such encouraging talk as this, the Athenians took up their new position. But the Thebans discovered what had been done to deserters and told Mardonius. Launching in the battle. He at once, either from fear of the Athenians, or from a chivalrous wish to fight the Spartans himself, led the native Persian troops to his right wing, and ordered the renegade Greeks to take ground opposite the Athenians. Help! When these changes were being observed, Pausanias returned to his original position on the left. Mardonius then returned to the left as before. St. Marcos is coming! Oh! Ow! Please, St. Marcos! To move their camps to a place far away and better supplied with water, because they were prevented from using the streams nearby they were by the enemy's great superiority in cavalry. Excellent. When my fellow generals began to move the army to the place before the camp. Oh, the soldiers that's for Billy. And willing to follow them thither and keep together in a body. Yeah, it's all squirrely little. Ouch! Most of them made for the hit me. Ow! And there was much stop. Help! Help! Oh, he's dead. I got him. Oh no! This is monstrous! Oh, I'm gonna die! Help! Help! Okay, let me go with my weakest smart. And withstand Mardonius alone. When Pausanias came and assured him that the Greeks in council had decided upon this measure, among the reason that the two standard both stand and thinking it down at the feet of Pausanias, said, with his pebble I give my vote for battle, and for disregarding the cowardly counsels of other Greeks. Pausanias, not knowing what to do, said to the Athenians, who were already on the march, begging them to wait and support them. He set off with the rest of his armies in the direction of that, hoping thus to make a compromise. While these movements were being executed, Daero and Mardonius, who had received that the Greeks were leaving the camp, at once marched in order of battle to attack the Lacedaemonians. The Persians shouting and clapping their arms as though they were not.
I'll blast you with my electric fence.
Which indeed they very nearly succeeded in doing.
Ha ha!
Now
you can't do nothing. Look, I'm tearing him up. Oh, I got him!
Because of his anger at Amalphaeus,
my electric
fence not to send any orders to the main body of the Greeks. For this reason, they came up not in a regular body.
I've been building it up.
And after the Lacedaemonians were already engaged. Pausanias was busy sacrificing to the gods, and as the sacrifices
from the side, help!
ordered the Lacedaemonians to hold their
Help! No, please!
Please
don't kill me. Oops. Stop trying to shoot him. There, he's gone. Alright. I added some power to my it's gonna kill me.
Oh. He said that he did not lament his death, or he left his home until he done his life with peace.
Help!
That he was proved that he had never exchanged blows with the enemy.
Clods only killed me.
This time the Lacedaemonians were offering no resistance to the assaults of the enemy, but were standing still in their ranks.
Okay, well,
the arrows of the enemy,
gotta keep practicing. Gotta do better. Oh, we got a drop.
Pausanias was offering sacrifice and prayer a little beyond the ranks. Some living suddenly fell upon him and began to plunder the sacrificial vessels. But that Pausanias and those with him, having no arms, drove them away with sticks and whips. In memory of which they leave the young
those pesky robots.
And afterwards,
I'll tell them.
Called the living procession.
I'm not taking any lip off of that. Oh wait. Blaze. Oh, Blaze. What happened? Looked like she was nuclear analysis and
they might at any rate do some valorous deed before they die.
Here comes Cloud's
they had time to pray at least 30 warriors. Pausanias prayed thus. The sacrifices at once became favorable and the soothsayers prophesied victory.
Blaze! There's Blaze! You reincarnated hell.
You get behind some fierce beast turning today and setting up his
my shield's down.
Oh
no, here comes this annoying... Look, stop it. Stop it. St. Marcos. You're through! Blaze! Oh no, it's a mortar! Oh, hit behind me. That's the first time I did that. I came forward towards the mortar, and it landed behind me.
With their hands and breaking most of them in that manner, fighting hand to hand with their scimitars and axes, and tearing the Lacedaemonians' shields out of their hands by force. Meanwhile, the Athenians had for a long time stood fighting.
Would you mind dying? Blaze, die. Thank you.
They heard the shouting noise of the battle. It says, "You send Pausanias, they must all see each other." As they were turning over the planting of the shells were heard, the Greeks had taken the Persians.
What are friends for? Hey, Clobbs, what's going on?
The rest can be sought in a loud voice in the name of the gods of Greece, not to hinder the Athenians when they were going to assist those who had entering
there's
the
Blaze again. Who's that? That's for Billy. There's Blaze. Hey, Blaze.
He no longer attempted to help the Lacedaemonians, but attacked his troops, who numbered about 50,000.
Blaze.
Oh,
I missed him. Oh no, he's gonna hit me! Oh no! That killed my shield. See that? Ah! He crashed my computer! My computer's got to reboot when I see my guns don't work. Everything's got to reload them. Yeah, yeah. We won! 8-4!
As the oracle in the temple of Enphiros had foretold him. Or Mardonius sent a living pillar, and another man, Acarian, to the oracle in the cave of Trophonius. This latter was spoken to in Acarian language by the prophet, but the other slept in the PG-8, sacred enclosure around the temple of Enphiros, and in his dream saw a servant of the gods standing beside him.
Ow, these guys, stop! Is it Clobbs only, man? Clobbs? Man, Clobbs, can I have a word with you, Clobbs?
The Persian fugitives were now driven to take shelter within their wooden fortification. Shortly after these events took place, the Athenians defeated the Thebans, who lost 300 of their noblest citizens from that battle. After this there came a messenger to them, telling them that the Persians were being besieged in their fortified camp. Hearing this, the Athenians
hit me with a thermal round. Disassemble you, do your job, thank you.
They found the Lacedaemonians, who were repressing the enemy.
He's on my team now. Usually he's fighting me.
The Athenians forced their way into the camp with an slaughter of the enemy. It is said that out of 300,000, only 40,000 under arquebusiers escaped.
Oh, look out!
Of these, there were 52 Athenians, 23, which,
well, you know, these guys, I don't know why they're standing in the cover. Oh, St. Marcos, there you go. Be still. St. Marcos! Please, St. Marcos, do you mind? Please die. Marcos. Man, he's still going. He's got like 1 hit point. Oh no, and this guy's got thermal lance. He's coming right there. Help! What am I gonna do? Don't kill me, please. Don't kill me. Please, please don't kill me. Please, please, please.
This battle was fought on the day of the month.
Oh no, it's a mortar.
According to the Athenian calendar. and on the 26th of the month, according to the accounts, on which day the Red Meeting still takes place.
Oh, clubs only! I got him! Yay! Oh.
The discrepancy of the dates is no marvel, seeing that even at the present day, when astronomy is more accurately
Come on.
understood,
Yeah, that's good.
months on different days.
That's good. Yeah, just stand right there.
After the battle, as the Athenians did not assign the prize of the lower 24 to the base
Shit.
nor suffer them to set up a trophy.
No! Help!
We
won. But I died. My robot died. No, I'm on the board! Man, clubs only or neck and neck.
This is my equal. If they did not wish to bring about the civil war. To this Cleopas of Corinth made answer. All men expected that he would demand the honor for Corinth, which city had acquitted itself best, next to Athens and Sparta. But he made a very excellent and conciliatory speech, demanding that the prize should be bestowed on the Platinus, which means neither of the claims would be agreed. This was agreed by Aristides on behalf of the Athenians, and by Pausanias on behalf of the Lacedaemonians. Having thus settled their differences, they set apart from the plundering accounts for the Platinus, with which they built the temple of Athena and the shrine, and also decorated the temple with paintings, which even to this present day retain their luster. The Lacedaemonians set up a trophy for themselves, and the Athenians another one apart. When they inquired if Delphi what sacrifice was to be offered, the oracle bade them set up an altar to resist the protector of the freed, and not to sacrifice upon it until they had first put out all fires throughout the country, because if he had indefinitely
now you just relax, right?
You
gotta practice, so you just try your best.
The chiefs of the Greeks and
you go forward,
forcing everyone to extinguish his fire.
Clicking
in the case of funeral pyres, while each of the who promised that he would fetch fire as quickly as possible, proceeded to
strong Mac.
There he purified
put the space bar, hit the space bar for your shield. Okay, there's your shield. The blue line is your shield power. The bottom is your hit points.
He embraced his fellow citizens.
Your life. The bottom is your life. The top is your shield. Oh, he's a kill shot. Look how he's gonna bump you. Keep firing at him. Put the sight on him. Fire. Yeah, good.
She was a daughter of
out of shield.
The daughter of Menes, who was the sister of Patroclus.
Oh, well, that's okay. Stop blaming lag. Yeah, that's alright. Stop blaming lag. I've killed him. Okay. So what you need to do, Jared, is you need to move your mouse to okay. Yeah, now move your mouse down there. Okay. Now.
Also, he proposed that there should be a general levy throughout Greece for the war against the Persians of 10,000 heavy armed troops, 1,000 horse, and
there's no old cloak in there.
And that the Platinus should be held in Notable and consecrated to the service of the gods, to bring off the sacrifice for all Greece.
There's the old bank card.
And the people undertook to make various sacrifices in honor of those who had fallen fighting for Greece. It was PG 91. Bodies were buried there. This they performed even at the present day in the following fashion.
Why do you want it?
On the 16th day of the month Mynaterium, which in the Teton calendar is called...
Wow, you're doing pretty good. Oh, you made it all the way to the other side. That's pretty good. I love bowl cut. Got you. That mech has low hit points. Okay, this is your electric fence mech. Okay, so look at your spawn point. Yeah. That's where you are.
Because the men whose honor the sacrifice is made, died fighting for liberty.
Remember, when you want to block, when they're shooting at you, you hit the space bar. You wait till they're shooting at you. Now get behind that blue fence to attack, right? So that they can't fire, their weapons will not go through the blue fence.
He with his own hands draws water from the well, washes the headstones.
But you have to wait. See, the blue fence is powering up now. Now, usually what you do, now hit the blue fence, straight towards you.
Next, he mixes a large bowl of wine and water, pours out the cup for himself, and says, I drink those who died in the Prince of the Freedom of Greece. This custom is observed even to this day by the Platinus. XXII. After the return of the Athenians to their own city, Aristides observed that they desired to adopt a democratic form of government.
Yeah, when the mortars are coming, you're going to see that red sign. Okay, crash your pursuit.
And were confident in their strength because of the PG 92 victories which they had won. He carried a decree that every citizen should have a share in the government, and that Marcos should be chosen out of the whole body of the Athenians. When Aristotle told the Athenian assembly that he had in his mind a proposition to fight as a state, which nevertheless could not be openly discussed, but people laid Aristides alone listen to what he was and give his opinion upon it. Then Aristotle told Aristides that he meditated for
the main thing is that you need to be calm.
By this means, Athens would become the greatest state in Greece, and mistress of all the others.
But if you get angry, you get upset.
To the assembly and said that the proposal of Themistocles, although most advantageous, was yet most wicked and unjust. When the people heard this, they forbade Themistocles to prosecute his crime. So how did the Athenians prize justice, and so well and faithfully did Aristides serve them. XXII means his title, with him as his colleague, Notable referred him. He received his house, using the other southern generals were hearkening to their allies.
That's okay.
And he himself, by treating them with kindness and consideration, aided by the just and timely temper shown by King in the campaign, gradually obtained supreme authority over them, not having run it by arms or force, but by courtesy and wise policy. The Athenians, already beloved by the Greeks, on account of the justice of Aristides and the kindliness of Timon, were much more endeared to them by the insolent brutality of Pausanias, who always spoke roughly and angrily to the chiefs of the various contingents of allies, and used to punish the common men by stripes, or by forcing them to stand all day with a heavy iron anchor on their shoulders.
Okay, that's a robot that will fire a machine gun for you. That's your special power. But you usually only want to do that when an enemy is in front of you. When you're on the Arachnos, that, you see that little guy on the ground? That's what happened when you put the space on. Yeah. He won't fire unless one of your enemies. See, now he's firing at your enemy.
He answered that he admitted the justice and
enemy gets close, he'll automatically fire for
some actors would make it impossible for a great army of them to draw back. On this, Julius of Samos and 8 outdoors of crews conspired together, and off Byzantium, they ran on board of the ship of Pausanias, which was sailing before the rest. Beyond seeing this, rose up in a rage and threatened that in a short time he would let them know that they had not endangered the ship, but their own native cities. They in answer bade him go his way and be thankful for the victory at Platylon under his command, for that it was which alone restrained the Greeks from dealing with him as he deserved. Finally he left him, and sailed away to join the Athenian ships. On this occasion the magnanimous conduct of the Lacedaemonians deserves high praise. When they perceived that the heads of their generals were being turned by the greatness of their power, they of their own accord withdrew from the supreme power, and no longer sent any generals to the wars, choosing rather to have moderate citizens who would abide by their laws at home, than to bear rule over the whole of Greece. Even while the Lacedaemonians remained in command, the Greeks paid a certain contribution to pay the expenses of the war. And as they wished each city to be assessed to pay a reasonable sum, they asked the Athenians to appoint Aristides to visit each city, learn the extent of its territory and revenues, and fix upon the amount which each was capable of contributing according to its means. Although he was in possession of such a power as this whole of police having as it were given itself up to be dealt with at his discretion, and he laid down his office of orderman and when he accepted it, but having completed his assessment to the satisfaction of all. As the ancients used to tell of the blessedness of the Golden Age, PG 94, even so did the states of Greece honor the assessment made by Aristides, calling the time when it was made fortunate and blessed for Greece, especially when no long time afterwards it was doubled, and subsequently trebled. The money which Aristides proposed to raise amounted to 460 talents, to which Pericles added nearly a third part, for Thucydides tells us that at the commencement of the Peloponnesian War, the Athenians received 600 talents a year from their allies. After the death of Pericles, the popular orators gradually raised the sum total to 1,300 talents. It was not so much that the money was required for the expenses of a long and costly war, as that these men had accustomed the people to largesses of money, dramatic representations, and the erection of statues and temples. Themistocles was the only man who had sneered at the great reputation which Aristides had won by his assessment of the Greek states, saying that the praise which was lavished on him was not suitable to a man, but to a chest which kept money safe. This he said as a retort to the saying of Aristides, who once, when Themistocles said that he thought it the most valuable quality for a general to be able to divine beforehand what the enemy would do, answered, that Themistocles is very true, but it is also the part of an honorable general to keep his hands clean. XXV. Aristides, moreover, bound all the Greeks by an oath to keep a league against the Persians, and himself swore on behalf of Athens, throwing wedges of red-hot iron into the sea after the oath was taken, and praying that the gods might so deal with those that broke their faith. But afterwards, when circumstances forced the Athenians to govern with a strong hand, he bade the Athenians act as they pleased, for he would take upon himself any guilt of perjury which they might incur. And throughout his life Theophrastus observes that Aristides, though scrupulously just in his dealings with his fellow citizens, yet sometimes in dealing with other states was guided rather by advantage than by equity.
This name right here,
when the Athenians were debating a proposal of the Samians, that the treasure of the league should be removed from Delos to Athens, a thing distinctly con PG 95, contrary to the articles of the alliance, Aristides said that it was not just, but that it was expedient to do so. He himself, at the end of his life, after raising his state to be the ruler of so many people, remained in his original poverty, and took no less pride in his poverty than in the victories which he had won. This is proved by the following anecdote. Callias, the torch-bearer in the Eleusinian Mysteries, a relation of his, was being prosecuted on a capital charge by his private enemies. After speaking with great moderation upon the subject of the indictment, they used the following argument to the jury. Gentlemen, you all know Aristides the son of Lysimachus, whose name is renowned throughout Greece. How think you the man fares at home, when you see him appearing in public with such a worn-out cloak? May we not suppose when we see him shivering out of doors, that he has but little to eat at home, and is in want of common necessaries? Yet Callias, the richest man in Athens, allows this man, who is his own cousin, to be in want, he and his wife and children, though he has often benefited by him and profited by his influence with you. Callias, perceiving that the jury were especially wrought upon by this appeal and that it was likely to tell against him, called Aristides into the court, and begged of him to bear witness to the jury that although he had often offered him money and begged him to accept it, he had always refused, answering that he prided himself more upon his poverty than Callias did upon his wealth. For one may see many persons making both a good and a bad use of riches, but it is hard to meet with a man who bears poverty with honor. Those only should be ashamed of poverty who are poor against their wills. When Aristides bore witness to the truth of this, on behalf of Callias, there was no one who heard him but left the court wishing rather to be poor like Aristides than rich like Callias. This story is preserved by Kynes, the companion of Socrates. Plato considers that this man alone, of all the great men of Athens, is worthy of mention by him. Themistocles, and Cimon, and Pericles, did indeed fill the city with public buildings, and money, and folly, but the PG 96, Thebes in his political acts cared for nothing but virtue. One great proof of this is his kindly treatment of Themistocles. Though this man was his enemy throughout, and was the cause of his banishment by ostracism, yet when Themistocles gave him an opportunity of revenging himself in a similar manner, he never remembered the injuries which he had received at his hands. The Guadalquivir and Alkmn and many others were endeavoring to drive him into exile and bringing all kinds of accusations against him. Aristides alone never did or said anything against him, and did not rejoice over the spectacle of his enemy's ruin, just as he never envied his previous prosperity.
Let's see.
Next
Japanese, so we should say
some writers say that Aristides died in Pontus, to which country he had been sent on matters of state, while others say that he died old age in Athens, respected by all his countrymen there.
Watashi no
Plotinus of Macedonia tells us the following particulars about his end. After Themistocles went into exile, the common people grew insolent and produced a numerous root of informers, who constantly assailed the noblest and most powerful citizens through envy of their prosperity and influence. One of these men, Diophantus of Amphitrite by name, obtained a verdict against Aristides on the charge of receiving bribes. It was stated that when he was regulating the assessment of the Ionians, he received money from them to tax them more lightly.
He's Japanese.
As he was unable to pay the fine of 50 men which the court laid upon him, he left Athens and died somewhere in Ionia. But Craterus offers no documentary evidence.
私の日本語を上手じゃありません。Means my Japanese is not very good.
And almost all others who have spoken of the harsh treatment of generals by the people mentioned the banishment of Themistocles, the imprisonment of Miltiades, the fine imposed on Pericles, and the suicide of Pacus before the
Ladies and gentlemen, pardon me while I answer my wife's queries.
They never moved to this and sentence upon him. XXVII. Moreover, there was a student fellow, PG-97, which is said to have been constructed at the public expense, because he did not leave enough money to defray his funeral expenses. It is also related
we're going to pay the power bill. So, in case you're wondering,
we're
going to be offline.
At the instance of Alcibiades, his son Lysimachus was also presented with 800 silver mines, and as many acres of planted land, and in addition to this, an allowance of 4 drachmas a day. Themistocles also tells us that this Lysimachus leading a daughter named Polyphyte, she was assigned by the Athenians the same daily allowance of food as is bestowed upon the victors in the Olympian Games. But Demetrius of Phalerum, Hieronymus of Rhodes, Aristoxenus the musician, and Aristotle, if we are to believe the treatise on nobility to be a genuine work of his say, that Virgo, the granddaughter of Aristides, lived in the house of Socrates the philosopher, who was indeed married to another woman, but who took her into his house because she was a widow and destitute of the necessaries of life. These authors are sufficiently confuted by Pantheus in his writings on Socrates. Demetrius of Phalerum says, in his book about Socrates, that he knew one Lysimachus, a very poor man, who dwelt near the temple of Iolcus and made his living by the interpretation of dreams.
Thought it was a bad word.
Demetrius further states that he carried a before the assembly by which this man's mother and sister was provided with a pension of 3 rubles daily at a public expense. Demetrius, however, when himself a legislator, appointed that each of these women should receive a drachma instead of 3 rubles a day. And we need not wonder at the people taking such care of the resident citizens, when we read that, hearing that the granddaughter of Aristogiton was living in poverty at Lemnos, so poor that no one would marry her, they brought her back to Athens, gave her in marriage to a man of high birth, and bestowed upon her a farm eponymous for a marriage portion. The city of Athens has shown many instances of this kindness and goodness of heart even down to our times, and is justly praised and admired for it. Footnotes: 17. The Attic Modinus contained 12 imperial gallons, or 1 1/2 bushels. 18. A circular or cyclic chorus was strictly one which danced and sang round an altar, but especially refers to the dithyrambic chorus as appropriated to Bacchus. 19. The bathroom at Athens was a deep pit, with hooks on the sides, into which criminals were cast. 20. Alluding to the letter which he had sent to Xerxes. See Life of Themistocles. 21. See Life of Themistocles. 22. So in Latin hostis originally meant both a stranger and an enemy. 23. These men traced their descent to the Homeric Ajax. 24. This was always given before the equal division of the plunder took place. Cf. 3rd. IX. 268. SQQ. 25. Whether a cinerary urn for the ashes of the dead, or a water pot or drawing water is meant, I am unable to determine. Clow takes the latter meaning, which is borne out by the context. On the other hand, the Greek word is used by Plutarch's Life of Philip N. CHXXI in the sense of an urn to contain the ashes of the dead. PG 98 Life of Marcus Cato. Marcus Cato is said to have been born at Tusculum, but to have been brought up and spent his time upon a farm belonging to his father in the Sabine territory, before he began to take part in war politics. We know nothing of his ancestry, except that he himself tells us that his father, Marcus, was a good man and brave soldier, and that his grandfather, Cato, received several military rewards for his services, and that having had 5 horses killed under him, he received a value of them from the public treasury, as an acknowledgement of his gallantry. It was the Roman custom to call those who had no ancestry to recommend them, but who rose by their own merits, new men. This name was applied to Cato, who said that he was indeed new to honors and posts of importance, but that, in respect of his brave and virtuous ancestry, he was a man of ancient family. His third name originally was not Cato, but Priscus, and was changed to Cato on account of his wisdom, for in Latin Catus means clever. In appearance he was rather red-haired, and gray-eyed, peculiarities which are naturally dwelt upon by the writer of the epigram. Red-haired, gray-eyed, and savage-tusked as well, Phorcys will find no welcome in hell. Accustomed as he was to hard exercise, temperate living, and frequent campaigns, his body was always both healthy and strong. While he also practiced the power of speech, thinking it a necessary instrument for a man who does not intend to live an obscure and inactive life. He consequently improved his talents in this respect by pleading causes in the neighboring villages and towns, PG 99, so that he was soon admitted to be a capable speaker, and afterwards to be a good orator. From this time all who conversed with him received a grounding in wisdom in his mind which qualified him to undertake the most important duties of a statesman. Not only was he so disinterested as to plead without receiving money from his clients, but he also did not think the glory which he gained in these contests to be that after which a man ought to strive, in comparison with that which is gained in battle and campaigns, in which he was so eager to distinguish himself that when quite around his body was covered with wounds, all in front. He himself tells us that he made his first campaign at the age of 17, when Hannibal was ranging through away uncontrolled. In battle he was calm, steadfast, and undismayed, and was wont to address the enemy with less and rough language, and to encourage the others to do so, as he rightly pointed out that this often cows the enemy's spirit as effectually as blows. When on the march he used to carry his own arms, and be followed by one servant who carried his provisions. It is said that he never spoke harshly to this man, no matter what food he placed before him, but that he would often help him to do his work when he was at leisure from military duty.
You can see their hang.
He drank only water when campaigning, except that when suffering from parching thirst he would ask for some vinegar, and sometimes when his strength fairly failed he would drink a little wine.
So if you click on it, it will show you his
Near his estate was a cottage which had once belonged to Manius Curius, who 3 times received the honor of a triumph. Cato used frequently to walk over and look at this cottage, and, as he observed the smallness of the plot of ground attached to it, and the simplicity of the dwelling itself, he would reflect upon how Curius, after having made himself the first man in Rome, after conquering the most warlike nations, and driving King Paris out of Italy, used to dig this little plot of ground with his own hands, and dwelt in this little cottage, after having thrice triumphed. It was there that the ambassadors of the Samnites found him sitting by the hearth, cooking turnips, and offered him much gold. But he sent them away, saying that a man who was contented with PG 100, such a supper, had no need of gold, and that it was more honorable for him to conquer those who possessed gold than to possess it himself. Cato, after leaving the cottage, full of these memories, returned to his own house and farm, and after viewing its extent and the number of slaves upon it, he increased the amount of his own daily labor, and retrenched his superfluous expenses. When Fabius Maximus took the city of Tarentum, Cato, who was a very young lad at the time, was serving in his army. He became intimate with one Nerchus, a philosopher of the Pythagorean school, and listened with much interest to his discourses. Hearing this man, like Plato, described pleasure as the greatest temptation to evil, and the body as the chief hindrance to the soul, which can only free and purify itself by such a course of reasoning as removes it from necessity above all bodily passions and feelings, he was yet more encouraged in his love of simplicity and frugality. In other respects, he is said to have studied Hellenic literature late in life, and not to have read Greek books till extreme old age, when he greatly improved his style of thought.
Cross your fingers, it's gotta be good. Let's see what you get.
His writings are full of Greek ideas and Greek anecdotes.
Yay! 8 coins is the greatest thing to get. That's the greatest thing. Wow. And you got a nice Zephyr Sunrise scan, but we don't have a Zephyr.
Proceed to the court early in the morning, and plead the causes of all who required his services, and then on returning to his farm would work with his servants. In winter wearing a coarse coat without sleeves, in summer nothing but his tunic, and how he used to sit at meals with his servants, eating the same loaf and drinking the same wine. Many other stories of his goodness and simplicity and sententious remarks were related to Valerius, who became interested in his neighbor, and invited him to dinner. They became intimate, and Valerius, observing his quiet and ingenuous disposition, PG 101, like a plant that requires careful treatment and an expansive space in which to develop itself, encouraged and urged him to take part in the political life of Rome. On going to Rome, he at once gained admirers and friends by his able pleadings in the law courts, while he obtained considerable preferment by the interest of Valerius, being appointed first military tribune, and then praetor. After this he became so distinguished a man as to be able to compete with Valerius himself for the highest offices in the state, and they were elected together, first as consuls, and afterwards as censors. Of the older Romans, Cato attached himself particularly to Fabius Maximus, a man of the greatest renown and power, although it was his disposition and mode of life which Cato especially desired to imitate. Wherefore he did not hesitate to oppose Scipio the Great, who was then a young man, but a rival and opponent of Fabius. Cato was appointed to act as his tutor in the war in Africa, and on perceiving that Scipio was living with his usual lavish expenditure, and supplying his soldiery with extravagant bread, he sharply rebuked him, saying that it was not the waste of the public money that vexed him so much as the ruin of the old frugal habits of the soldiers, who were led to indulge in pleasure and luxury by receiving more than was necessary to supply their daily wants. When Scipio answered that he did not require an economist for his praetor, at a time when he was preparing to wage war on a grand scale, and reminded him that he would have to give an account to the Roman people of battles won, not the money expended, Cato left the army of Scipio, which was then being assembled in Sicily. He proceeded at once to Rome, and by adding his voice to that of Fabius in the Senate, in blame of Scipio's unspeakable waste of money, and his childish and unsoldierly love of the public games 26, and the theater, conduct more worthy of the president of a public festival than of the commander-in-chief of an army, prevailed upon the people to send tribunes to inquire into the charges against him, and if they proved true, to bring him back to Rome. When they arrived in Sicily, however, Scipio pointed out to them that the PG 102 orations which he had made would ensure him the victory, and that although he loved pleasant society in his hours of leisure, yet that he had never allowed his pleasures to interfere with his serious duties. The tribunes were perfectly satisfied with this explanation, and Scipio sailed for Africa. IV. Cato, however, gained considerable credit by his speeches on this occasion, and the Romans generally called him the Demosthenes. Yet his
so that's 975. You have to save more 8 coins.
Nearly all the men of the time sought to attain, but Cato was singular in his keeping up the severe traditions of his ancestors in laboring with his own hands, eating a simple dinner, lighting no fire to cook his breakfast, wearing a plain dress, living in a mean house, and neither coveting superfluities nor courting their possessors. The Romans were at this period extending their empire so much as to lose much of their own original simplicity of living, as each new conquest brought them into contact with foreign customs and new modes of life. They therefore naturally looked with admiration upon Cato, observing that while they became enervated by pleasures and broke down under labors, he on the other hand seemed unaffected by either, and that too, not only while he was young and eager for fame, but even when he was an old gray-headed man, after he had been consul and had triumphed, he had, like a victorious athlete, still kept himself in training, and never relaxed his severe discipline.
Look at all the
himself tells us that he never wore a garment worth more than 100 drachmas, that when he was general consul he still drank the same wine as his servants, that his dinner never cost him more than 30 aces to the market, and that he only indulged himself to this extent for the good of the state, that he might be strong and able to serve his country.
Click on it.
Before he was left a piece of Babylonian tapestry he had once
disposed of.
None of his rooms were whitewashed, and he never bought a slave for more than 1,500 drachmas, seeing that he required no dependent and handsome servants, but hard-working and strong men, to tend his horses and PG 103, herd his cattle, and these, too, when they grew old and past work, he thought he passed his life, and not feed them at his expense when they were useless. His rule was that nothing is cheap which one does not want, but the superfluities are dearly purchased even if they cost but 1 penny, and that it is better to buy land which can be plowed, or where cattle can graze, than beds of flowers which require watering, and paths which have to be swept and kept in order. These habits some ascribed to narrowness of mind, while others thought that he carried parsimony and that was to excess in himself in order by his example to reform and restrain others. Be this as it may, I for my own part consider that his conduct in treating the slaves like beasts of burden, and selling them when old and worn out, is the mark of an excessively harsh disposition, which disregards the claims of our common human nature, and merely considers the question of profit and loss. Kindness, indeed, is of wider application than mere justice. For we naturally treat men alone according to justice and the laws, while kindness and gratitude, as though from a plenteous spring, often extend even to irrational animals. It is right for a good man to feed horses which have been worn out in his service, and not merely to train dogs when they are young, but to take care of them when they are old. When the Athenian people built the Parthenon, they set free mules which had done the hardest work in drawing the stones up to the Acropolis, and let them graze where they pleased unmolested. It is said that one of them came of his own accord to where the works were going on, and used to walk up to the Acropolis with the beasts who were drawing up their loads, as if to encourage them and show them the way. This mule was, by a decree of the people of Athens, maintained at the public expense for the rest of its life. The brass horses of Kimon also, who won an Olympic victory, are buried close to the monument of their master. Many persons, too, have made friends and companions of dogs, as did Xanthippus in old times, whose dog swam all the way to Salamis beside his master's ship when the Athenians left their city, and which he BG 104, buried on the promontory which to this day is called the dog's tomb. 27. We ought not to treat living things as we do our clothes and our shoes, and throw them away after we have worn them out. But we ought to accustom ourselves to show kindness in these cases, if only in order to teach ourselves our duty towards one another. For my own part, I would not even sell an ox that had labored for me because he was old, much less would I turn an old man out of this accustomed possible of life, which is as great an affliction to an sending him into a foreign land, merely that I might gain a few miserable points by selling what must be as useless to his buyer as he was to his seller. Cato, however, as if taking a perverse pleasure in flaunting his meannesses, relates that he left behind him in Spain a horse which he rode when consul there, in order to save the state the cost of carrying him over to Italy. Whether those acts of his are to be ascribed to magnanimity or narrow-mindedness, the reader must decide for himself. He was a man of wonderful talents, in all other respects also. For example, when he was general, he only drew from the public stock 3 bushels of wheat a month for himself and his servants, and less than 3 bushels of barley a day for his horses. When he was governor of Sardinia, where former governors had been in the habit of charging their tents, bedding, and wearing apparel to the province, and likewise making it pay large sums for their entertainment to that of their friends, he introduced an unheard of system of economy. He charged nothing to the province, and visited the various cities without a carriage, walking on foot alone, attended by one single public servant carrying his robe of state and a vessel to make libations at a sacrifice. With all this he showed himself so affable and simple to those under his rule, so severe and inexorable in the administration of justice, and so vigilant and careful in seeing that his orders were duly executed, that the government of Rome never was more feared or more loved in Sardinia than when he governed that island. PG 105, III. His conversation seems also to have had this character, for he was cheerful and harsh all at once, pleasant and yet severe as a companion, fond of jokes, but morose at the same time, just as Plato tells us that Socrates, if judged merely from his outside, appeared to be only a silly man with a face like a satyr, who was rude to all he met, though his inner nature was earnest and full of thoughts that moved his hearers to tears and touched their hearts. For this reason I cannot understand how any persons can see a likeness between the orations of Lysias and those of Cato. However, this point must be decided by those who are more skilled than myself in the comparison of oratorical styles. I shall now relate a few of his more remarkable sayings, believing that a man's real character can be better judged of by his words than by his looks, although some people hold a contrary opinion. VII. Once when he wished to restrain the Romans from distributing a large quantity of corn as a largesse to the people, he began his speech. It is difficult, my fellow citizens, to make the stomach hear reason, because it has no ears. When desiring to blame the extravagance of the Romans, he said that a city could not be safe in which a fish sold dearer than an ox. He said, too, that the Romans were like sheep, who never form opinions of their own, but follow where the others lead them. Just so, said he, when you are assembled together you are led by men whose advice you would scorn to take about your own private affairs. With regard to female influence he once said, all mankind rule their wives, we rule all mankind, and we are ruled by our wives. This remark, however, is borrowed from Themistocles. He one day, when his child was instigating its mother to lay many commands upon him, said, Wife, remember that the Athenians rule the Greeks, I rule the Athenians, you rule me, and your child rules you. Wherefore let him not abuse his power, which, though he knows it not, is greater than that of anyone else in Greece. Cato also said that the Romans fixed the price, not only of different values, but of different professions. Just as desires, said he, dye stuff of whatever color they see people pleased with. So PG 106, your young men only study and apply themselves to those subjects which are praised and commanded by you. He used also to beg of them, if they had become great by virtue and self-restraint, not to degenerate. And if, on the other hand, their empire had been won by licentiousness and vice, to reform themselves, since by the latter means they had become so great as not to need any further assistance from them. Those who were always seeking office, he said, were like men who did not find their way, who always wished to walk with verse 28, before them to show them the road. He blamed his countrymen for often electing the same men to public offices. You will appear, said he, either to think that the office is not worth much, or else that there are not many worthy to fill it. Alluding to one of his enemies who led a dissolute and discreditable life, he said, that man's mother takes it as a curse rather than a blessing if anyone hopes that her son will survive her. When a certain man sold his ancestral estate, which was situated by the seashore, Cato pretended to admire him, as being more powerful than the sea itself, for this man, said he, has drunk up the fields which the sea itself could not swallow. When King Ormines came to Rome, the Senate received him with special honors, and he was much courted and drunk after. Cato, however, held himself aloof and would not go near him, and when someone said that he is an excellent man, and a good friend to Rome, he answered, it may be so, but a king is by nature an animal that lives on human flesh. None of those who had borne the title of king, according to Cato, were to be compared with Epaminondas, or Pericles, or Themistocles, or with Manius Curius or Hamilcar Barcus. He used to say that his enemies hated him because he began his day's work while it was still dark, and because he neglected his own affairs to attend to those of the public. He also was wont to say that he had rather his good actions should go unrewarded than that his bad ones should be unpunished, and that he pardoned all who did wrong except himself. IX. When the Romans sent 3 ambassadors to PG 107, Bithynia, one of whom was crippled by the gout, another had been trepanned and had a piece taken out of his head, and the third was thought to be a simpleton, Cato remarked that the Romans had sent an embassy which had neither feet, head, nor heart. When, for the sake of Polybius the historian, Scipio entreated Cato to exert his influence on behalf of the arch-exiles, after a long debate in the Senate, where some advised that they should be sent back to their own country, and some that they should still be detained at Rome, he got up and said, had we nothing better to do than to sit all day discussing whether a parcel of old Greeks shall be buried here or in Achaia. A few days after the Senate had decreed the restoration of the exiles, Polybius proposed to make another application, that they should be restored to all the offices which they formerly held in Achaia. He asked Cato whether he thought that he should succeed in the second appeal to the Senate. To which Cato answered with a smile, that he was imitating Ulysses, when he returned again into the cave of the Cyclops to fetch the hat and girdle which he had left behind and forgotten. He said that wise men gain more advantage from fools, than fools from wise men. For the wise men avoid the errors of fools, but fools cannot imitate the example of wise men. He said that he loved young men to have red cheeks rather than pale ones, and that he did not care for a soldier who used his hands while he marched and his feet while he fought, or one who snored louder in bed than he shouted in battle. When reproaching a very fat man, he said, how can this man's body be useful to his country, when all parts between the neck and the groin are possessed by the belly? Once when an epicure wished to become his friend, he said that he could not live with a man whose palate was more sensitive than his heart. He said also that the soul of a lover inhabits the body of his beloved. He himself tells us that in his whole life he repented of 3 things only. First, that he had trusted a woman with a secret. Secondly, that he had gone by water when he might have gone by land. Thirdly, that he had passed one day without having made his will. To an old man who was acting wrongly he said, PG 108, my good sir, old age is ugly enough without your adding the deformity of wickedness to it. When a certain tribune, who was suspected of being a poisoner, was endeavoring to carry a bad law, Cato remarked, young man, I do not know which is the worst for us, to drink what you mix, or to enact what you propose. Once when he was abused by a man of vicious life, he answered, we are not contending upon equal terms. You are accustomed to hearing and using bad language, while I am both unused to hearing it and unwilling to use it. X. When he was elected consul, together with his friend and neighbor Valerius Flaccus, the province which fell to his lot was that which the Romans call hither Spain. 29. While he was there engaged in establishing order, partly by persuasion, and partly by force, he was attacked by a large army of the natives, and was in danger of being disgracefully defeated by their overwhelming numbers. Consequently he applied for aid to the neighboring tribe of the Celtiberians, who demanded as the price of their assistance the sum of 200 talents. At this everyone protested that it was unworthy of Romans to pay barbarians for their lives, but Cato said that he saw no evil in the practice, since, if the Romans were victorious, they would pay them from the spoils of the enemy, while if they were defeated there would be no one to demand the money and no one to pay it. He won a pitched battle on this occasion, and was very successful in his whole campaign. Polybius indeed tells us that in one day his command all the cities on this side of the river Guadalquivir pulled down their walls. And yet they were very numerous, and filled with a warlike population. Cato himself tells us that he took more cities than he spent days in Spain. Nor is this a vain boast, if the number captured really, as was stated, amounted to 400. His soldiers enriched themselves considerably during the campaign. And at the termination of it he distributed a pound of silver to each man, saying that it was better that many Romans should return to Rome with silver in their pockets than that a few should return with gold. PG 109, he himself states that he received no part of the plunder except what he ate or drank. I do not, said he, blame those who endeavor to enrich themselves by such means, but I had rather vie with the noblest in virtue than with the richest in wealth, or with the most covetous in covetousness. He not only kept his own hands clean, but those of his followers also. He took 5 servants to the war with him. One of these, Ophius by name, bought 3 boys at the sale of captives. But when Cato heard of it, Ophius, rather than coming to his peasants, hanged himself. Cato sold the boys, and paid the price into the public treasury. Side. While he was still in Spain, Scipio the Great, who was his personal enemy, desiring to check his career of success, and to obtain the management of Spanish affairs for himself, contrived to get himself appointed to succeed Cato in his government. He at once hurried to Spain and brought Cato's rule to an end. Cato, however, at once marched to meet Scipio with an escort of 5 companies of infantry and 500 horsemen. On his way he conquered the tribe of the Lassitani, and finding among them 600 deserters from the Roman army, he put them to death. When Scipio expressed his dissatisfaction with this, Cato sarcastically answered that Rome would be greatest if those of high birth and station, and those of plebeian origin like himself, would only contend with one another in virtue. However, as the Senate decreed that nothing that Cato had settled in the province should be altered or rearranged, Scipio found that it was he rather than Cato that was disgraced, as he had to pass his time in inglorious idleness, while Cato, after enjoying a triumph, did not retire into a life of luxury and leisure, as is done by so many men whose object is display rather than true virtue, after they have risen to the highest honors in the state by being elected consuls and enjoying the honor of the triumph. He did not impair the glorious example which he had given, by withdrawing his attention from the affairs of his country, but offered his services to his friends and fellow countrymen, both in the courts of law and in the field, as willingly as those who have just begun their public career, and are keenly eager to be BG 110, elected to some new office in which they may win fresh distinction. XII. He went with the consul Tiberius Sempronius as legate, and assisted him in regulating the country about the Danube and Thrace. And he also served as military tribune under Manius Archelaus during his campaign in Greece against Antiochus the Great, who caused more terror to the Romans than any one man since the time of Hannibal. Antiochus had originally inherited nearly the whole of Asia, that is, as much as Sallutus Nicator had possessed, and having added many warlike tribes to his empire, was so laid by his conquests as to attack the Romans, whom he regarded as the only nation remaining in the whole world which was worthy to be his antagonist. He put forward as a plausible reason for beginning the war that he intended to liberate the Greeks, who did not require his interference, as they had just been made free and independent by the Romans, who had delivered them from the tyranny of Philip and the Macedonians. Antiochus crossed over into Greece, which at once became unsettled, and a prey to hopes and fears suggested by her political leaders. Manius at once sent ambassadors to the various cities. Titus Flaminius, as has been related in his life, restrained the greater part of them from revolutionary proceedings, and kept them to their allegiance, but Cato won over Corinth, Patra and Ium. Most of his time was spent in Athens. And there was said to be still extant a speech which he made to the people there in Greek, in which he speaks with admiration of the virtue of the Athenians of old, and dwells upon his own pleasure in viewing so great and beautiful a city. This, however, is a fabrication, for we know that he conversed with the Athenians through an interpreter, though he was able to speak their language, because he wished to keep to the ways of his fathers, and administer a rebuke to those who extravagantly admired the Greeks. Thus he left at Postumius Albinus, who wrote a history in Greek and begged that his mistakes might be pardoned, saying that it would be right to pardon them if he wrote his history by a decree of the Council of Amphipians. He himself says that the Athenians were surprised at the shortness BG 111, and pregnant nature of his talk. For what he said in a few words, his interpreter translated by a great many, and in general he concludes that the Greeks talk from the lips, and the Romans from the heart. XIII. When Antiochus occupied the pass of Thermopylae with his army, and, after adding to the natural strength of the place by artificial defenses, established himself there as if in an impregnable position, the Romans decided that to attack him in front were altogether impossible. But Cato, remembering how the Persians under Xerxes had turned the Greek forces by a circuitous march over the mountains, took a part of the force and set off by night. When they had gone for some distance over the mountains, the prisoner who served as their guide lost his way, and wandered about in that precipitous and pathless wilderness so as to cause great discouragement to the soldiers. Seeing this, Cato ordered everyone to halt and await his orders, and himself, with one companion, one Lucius Manlius, unexperienced mountaineer, laboriously and daringly plunged along through intense darkness, for there was no moon, while the trees and rocks added to their difficulties by preventing their seeing distinctly whither they were going, until they came to a path, which, as they thought, led directly down upon the camp of the enemy. Hereupon they set up marks to guide them upon some conspicuous crags of Mount Calidronus, and returning to the army, led it to these marks, and started along the paths which they had discreet. But before they had proceeded far, the path ended in a precipice, at which they were both surprised and disheartened. For they could not tell, either by sight or hearing, that they were close to the enemy. It was now about daybreak, and they thought that they heard voices near at hand, and soon were able to see a Greek camp and an outpost at the foot of the precipice. Cato hereupon halted his army, and ordered the Firmiani, 30, in whom he would post a special confidence, to come forward alone. When they had assembled round him, he said, I wish to take up the enemy prisoner, and learn from him what troops this outpost is formed, what their numbers are, how the BG 112, the rest of the army are placed, and what preparations they have made to resist us. You must dash upon them as quickly and boldly as lions do upon their defenseless prey. At these words of Cato's, the Firmiani at once rushed down and attacked the outpost. The suddenness of their onset threw the enemy into complete confusion, and they soon caught one of them and brought him before Cato. Learning from this man that all the rest of the army was with King Antiochus himself, guarding the pass of Thermopylae, and that only a body of 600 Pipholians were watching the path over the mountains, Cato, despising so small and contemptible a force, at once drew his sword, and led on his troops with shouts and trumpets sounding the charge. The Aeolians, as soon as they saw the Romans descending from the hills, fled to the main body, and filled it with confusion and terror. XIV. Meanwhile Manius on the lower ground had attacked the fortifications in the pass with his entire force. Antiochus was struck on the mouth with a stone which knocked out several of his teeth, and the pain of his wound compelled him to wheel round his horse and retreat. His troops no longer withstood the Romans, but, although they had endless means of escape by roads where they could scarcely be followed, yet they crowded through the narrow pass with deep marshy ground on the one hand and inaccessible rocks upon the other, and there trampled each other to death for fear of the swords of the Romans. Cato never seems to have been sparing of his own praise, and thought that great deeds required to be told in boastful language. He gives a very pompous account of this battle, and says that all those who saw him pursuing and cutting down the enemy felt that Cato did not owe so much to the Romans, as the Romans owed to Cato. He also says that the consul Manius immediately after the victory was won, enfolded him for a long time in a close embrace, and loudly declared that neither he nor all the Roman people could ever do as much for Cato as he had that day done for them. He was sent immediately after the battle to bear the news of the victory to Rome, and reached Ragusa after a prosperous voyage. PG 113. From that place he drove in 1 day to Tarentum, and in 4 more days reached Rome with the news, on the 5th day after his landing. His arrival filled the whole city with feasting and rejoicing, and made the Roman people believe that there was no nation in the world which could resist their arms. XV. Of Cato's warlike exploits, these which we have related are the most remarkable. In his political life he seems to have thought one of his most important duties to be the impeachment and prosecution of those whom he thought to be bad citizens. He himself attacked many persons, and aided and encouraged others in doing so, a notable example being his conduct towards Scipio in the affair of Petilius. However, as Scipio was a man of noble birth and great spirit, he treated the attack made upon him with contempt, and Cato, perceiving that he could not succeed in getting him condemned to death, desisted from annoying him, but he was active in obtaining the condemnation of Scipio's brother Lucius, who was adjudged to pay a heavy fine, which was beyond his means to provide, so that he had nearly been cast into prison, but was set free by the intervention of the tribunes of the people. It is related of him that he once met in the form of a young man who had just succeeded in obtaining the disfranchisement, by an action at law, of an enemy of his father, who was dead. Cato took him by the hand and said, "Thus ought men to honor their parents when they die, not with the blood of lambs and kids, but with the tears and condemnation of their enemies." He himself is said to have been defended in nearly 50 actions, the last of which was tried when he was 86 years of age, on which occasion he uttered that well-known saying, that it was hard for a man who had lived in one generation to be obliged to defend himself before another. And this was not the end of his litigations, for 4 years later, when at the age of 90, he impeached Servius Galba. Indeed his life, like that of Nestor, seems to have reached over 3 generations. He, as had been related, was a bitter political opponent of Scipio Africanus the Great, and he continued his enmity to Scipio's adopted son, called Scipio the Younger, who was really the son of PG 114 Aelius Paulus, the conqueror of Perseus and the Macedonians. XVI. 10 years after his consulship, Cato became a candidate for the office of censor. This is the highest dignity to which a Roman can aspire, and may be regarded as the goal of political life. Its powers are very extensive, and it is especially concerned with the regulation of public morals, and the mode of life of the citizens of Rome. The Romans thought that none of a man's actions, his marriage, his family, his mode of life, his very entertainments, ought to be uncontrolled, and managed according to his own will and pleasure. They considered that a man's true character was much more clearly shown by his private life than by his public behavior, and were wont to choose 2 citizens, one a patrician, and the other a plebeian, whose duty it was to watch over the morals of the people, and check any tendency to licentiousness or extravagance. These officers they called censors, and they had power to deprive a Roman knight of his horse, and to expel men of loose and disorderly life from the Senate. They also took a census of property, and kept a register of the various tribes and classes of the citizens. And they likewise exercised various other important powers. Cato's candidature was opposed by nearly all the most distinguished members of the Senate, for the patricians viewed him with a special dislike, regarding it as an insult to the nobility that men of obscure birth should attain to the highest honors in the state, while all those who were conscious of any private vices or departures from the ways of their fathers, feared the severities of one who, they knew, would be harsh and inexorable when in power. These classes consequently combined together against Cato, and put up no less than 7 candidates to contest the censorship with him, and endeavored to sue the people by holding out to them hopes of a lenient censor, as though that were what they required. Cato, on the other hand, would not relax his severity in the least, but threatened evildoers in his speeches from the rostra, and insisted that the city required a most searching reformation. He told the people that if they were wise, they would choose not the most agreeable, but the most PG 115 thorough physicians to perform this operation for them, and that these would be himself and Valerius Flaccus. For with him as a colleague he imagined that he might make some progress in the work of destroying, by night and cautery, the hydra of luxury and effeminacy. Of the other candidates he said that he saw that each one was eager to get the office and fill it badly, because he was afraid of those who befell it well. The Roman people on this occasion showed itself so truly great and worthy to be courted by great men, as not to be alarmed at the earnest severity of Cato. But, setting aside all those plausible candidates who promised merely to consult their pleasure, elected Cato and Valerius censors. It seemed, indeed, as if Cato, instead of being a candidate for election, was already in office and issuing his commands to the people, which were at once obeyed. XVII. As soon as he was elected, Cato appointed his friend and colleague, Lucius Valerius Flaccus, chief of the Senate. He expelled several senators, amongst whom was Lucius Quintus, who had been consul 7 years before, and, which was even a greater distinction than the consulship, was the brother of Titus Quintius Flaminius, the conqueror of Philip. He was expelled from the Senate for the following reason. Lucius had a favorite boy who never left his person, and followed him on his campaigns. This boy had more power and received greater attention than the most trusty of his friends and relatives. Now, when Lucius was governor of a province as proconsul, this boy once, at a drinking party, was flattering him over his wine, saying that although there was going to be a show of gladiators at Rome, yet I did not stay to see it, but came out here to you, although I longed to see a man killed. Lucius, to please him, answered in the same tone, "If that be all, do not lie there and fret, for I will soon gratify your wish." He at once ordered a condemned criminal to be brought into the banqueting hall, and one of the servants to stand by him with an axe, and then again asked his favorite whether he wished to see a man struck dead. When the boy said that he did, he bade the servant cut off the man's head. This is the account which most writers give of the transaction, and PG 116, it is that Cicero introduces Cato as relating in his dialogue on old age. But Livy says that the man who was put to death was a Gaulish deserter, and that Lucius did not employ a servant, but slew him with his own hand, and this is the version which Cato has followed in his written account of the matter. When Cato discussed what took place at this wine party, Lucius endeavored to deny it, but on being challenged to state exactly what happened he refused to answer. He was most justly condemned to lose his right as a senator. But afterwards, when some spectacle was being witnessed in the theater, he walked past the place reserved for men of consular rank, and sat down in the humblest seat of all, which so moved the people to compassion, that they forced him by their clamor to resume his former seat, thus as far as they were able reversing the sentence upon him and condoning his office. Cato expelled another senator, who was thought likely to be soon elected consul, named Manilius, because he had kissed his wife in the daytime in the presence of his daughter. He himself said that his own wife never embraced him except when they thundered loudly, and added by way of joke, that he was happy when Jupiter was pleased to thunder. XVII. His conduct in depriving of his horse Lucius Scipio, the brother of Scipio Africanus, a man who had then decreed a triumph, was censured, as being merely prompted by private spite, as he seemed merely to do it in order to insult Scipio Africanus after his death. But because the greatest dissatisfaction were his restrictions on luxury. This he could not attack openly, because it had taken such deep root among the people, but he caused all clothes, carriages, women's ornaments, and furniture, which exceeding 1,500 drachmas in value to be rated at 10 times their value and taxed accordingly, as he thought that those who possessed the most valuable property ought to contribute most largely to the revenues of the state. In addition to this, he imposed a tax on all citizens of 3 copper aces for every 1,000, in order that those who were burdened with an excessive taxation on objects of luxury, when they saw PG 117, persons of frugal and simple habits paying so small a tax on the same income, might cease from their extravagance. This measure gained him the hatred of those who were taxed so heavily for their luxuries, and of those who, to avoid excessive taxation, were obliged to give up their luxuries. Most persons are as much irritated at losing the means of displaying their wealth as at losing their wealth itself, and it is in superfluities, not in necessaries, that wealth can be displayed. This is what is said to have so much surprised or in the philosopher, that men should consider those persons fortunate who possess what is superfluous, rather than those who possess what is necessary and useful. Scopas the Thessalian also, when one of his friends asked him for something which was not particularly useful to him, and added, that he did not ask for anything necessary or useful, answered, indeed, it is in these useless and superfluous things that my wealth chiefly consists. For the desire of wealth is not connected with any of our physical necessities, and is an artificial one arising from too much regard for the opinion of the vulgar. XIX. Cato paid no attention to those who blamed his conduct, and proceeded to measures of still greater severity. He cut off the water pipes, by which water was conveyed from the public fountains into private houses and gardens, destroyed all houses that encroached upon the public streets, lowered the price of contracts for public works, and farmed out the public revenues for the highest possible rents. All this made him still more unpopular. Titus Flaminius and his friends attacked him, and prevailed upon the Senate to annul the contracts which he had made for the building of temples and the construction of public works, on the ground that they were disadvantageous to the state. They also encouraged the boldest of the tribunes to prosecute him before the people, and to fine him 2 talents. He likewise received violent opposition in the matter of the Basilica, or public hall, which he built at the public expense in the form below the Senate House, and which was called the Basilica Portia. In spite of all this, his censorship seems to have been PG 118, wonderfully popular with the Roman people. When they placed the statue in the temple of Hygeia, they did not enumerate his campaigns or triumphs in the inscription on the base, but wrote what we may translate as follows. This statue was erected to Cato because, when censor, finding the state of Rome corrupt and degenerate, he, by introducing wise regulations and virtuous discipline, restored it. At one time Cato affected to despise those who took pleasure in receiving honors of this kind, and used to say that while they plumed themselves on being represented in brass or marble, they forgot that the fairest image was that of himself which every citizen bore in his heart. When anyone expressed surprise at his not having a statue, when so many obscure men had obtained that honor, he answered, I had rather that men should ask why I have no statue, than that they should ask why I have one. A good citizen, he said, ought not even to allow himself to be praised, unless the state were benefited thereby. He has glorified himself by recording that when men were detected in any fault, they would excuse themselves by saying that they must be pardoned if they did anything amiss, for they were not Catos, and that those who endeavored constantly to imitate his proceedings were called left-handed Catos. Also he states that the Senate looked to him in great emergencies as minister or looked at the power, and that when he was not present, they frequently postponed their more important business. This indeed is confirmed by other writers, for he had great influence in Rome on account of his virtuous life, his eloquence, and his great age. XX. He was a good father and a good husband, and was in his private life an economist of no ordinary kind, as he did not despise money-making or regard it as unworthy of his abilities. For this reason I think I ought to relate how well he managed his private affairs. He married a wife who was well born, though not rich. For he thought that though all classes might possess equally good sense, yet that a woman of noble birth would be more ashamed of doing wrong, and therefore more likely to encourage her husband to do right. He used to say PG 119, that a man who beat his wife or his children laid sacrilegious hands on the holiest of things. He also said that he had rather be a good husband than a great statesman, and that what he especially admired in Socrates the philosopher was his patience and kindness in bearing with his ill-tempered wife and his stupid children. When his son was born, he thought that nothing except the most important business of state ought to prevent his being present while his wife washed the child and wrapped it in swaddling clothes. His wife suckled the child herself. Nay, she often gave her breast to the children of her slaves, and so taught them to have a brotherly regard for her own son. As soon as he was able to learn, Cato himself taught him his letters, although he had a clever slave named Chilon, who taught many children to read. He himself declares that he did not wish the slave to withdraw his son or pull his ears because he was slow at learning. He taught the boy to read, and instructed him also in the Roman law and in bodily exercises, not confining himself to teaching him to roll the javelin, to fight in complete armor, and to ride, but also to use his fists in boxing, to endure the extremes of heat and cold, and to swim through swiftly flowing and eddying rivers. He tells us that he himself wrote books on history with his own hands in large letters, that the boy might start in life with the useful knowledge of what his forefathers had done, and he was as careful not to use an indecent expression before his son as he would have been before the Vestal virgins. He never bathed with him, which indeed seems to have been customary in Rome, as even fathers-in-law scrupled to bathe naked before their sons-in-law. In later times, however, the Romans learned from the Greeks the habit of bathing naked, and have taught the Greeks to do so even in the presence of women. While Cato was engaged in this great work of forming his son's character and completing his education, he found him eager to learn, and able to make great progress from his natural ability. But he appeared so weak and delicate that his father was obliged to relax the stern simplicity of his own life in his favor, and allow him some PG 120 genses in diet. The young man, although so weakly, yet proved himself a good soldier in the wars, and distinguished himself greatly in the battle in which Aeneas Paulus defeated King Perseus. Afterwards, upon the same day, he either had his sword struck from his hand or let it fall from weakness, and in his grief at the loss got together some of his friends and prevailed upon them again to charge the enemy. With great exertions they succeeded in clearing the space, and at length discovered his sword under a great heap of arms and corpses of friends and foes alike which were piled upon it. Paulus, the commander-in-chief, was much pleased with the youth's eagerness to regain his sword, and sent a letter to Cato in which he spoke in the highest terms of the courage and honorable feeling which he had shown. He afterwards married Tertia, the sister of Scipio, and had the gratification of pleasing his father as much as himself by thus allying himself with one of the noblest families in Rome. Thus was Cato rewarded for the care which he had bestowed upon his son's education. XXI. He possessed a large number of slaves, and when captives were for sale he always purchased those who were young, and who, like colts or puppies, could be taught and trained to their duties. None of them ever entered any house but his own, unless sent thither by Cato or by his wife, and if they were asked what Cato was doing, they always answered that they did not know. His rule was, that a slave ought either to be doing his business or to be asleep. And he greatly preferred good sleepers, as he thought that they were more easy-tempered than wakeful persons, and also that men who had slept well were better able to work than those who had lain awake. Knowing that love affairs lead slaves into mischief more than anything else, he permitted them to consort with his own female slaves at a fixed price, but forbade them to have anything to do with other women. Cato in his earlier days, being a poor man, and always employed in service in the field, never complained of anything that he ate, and thought it most disgraceful to quarrel with a servant for not having pleased his palate. Subsequently, however, as he became richer, he used PG 121, invite his friends and colleagues to dinner, and after the repast was wont to punish or discourage those servants who had made mistakes or cooked their food badly. He always endeavored to establish some quarrel amongst his slaves, so that they might plot against one another, instead of combining against himself. And when any of them appeared to have committed any crime deserving to be punished by death, the offender was formally tried, and if found guilty, was put to death in the presence of all his fellow servants. As Cato grew more eager to make money, he declared that farming was more an amusement than a source of income, and preferred investing his money in remunerative undertakings, such as marshes that require draining, hot springs, establishments for washing and cleaning clothes, land which would produce an income by pasturage or by the sale of wood, and the like, which afforded him a considerable revenue, and one which, as he said, not Jupiter himself could injure, meaning that he was not dependent upon the weather for his income, as farmers are. He also used to deal in marine insurance, which is thought to be a most dangerous form of investment, which he managed in the following manner. For the sake of security, he made those who wished to borrow money form themselves into an association of 50 persons, representing as many ships, and held one share in the undertaking himself, which was managed by his freedman Quintio, who himself used to sail in the ships of the association and transact their mercantile business. He used to lend money to his slaves, if they desired it. They used with the money to buy young slaves, teach them a trade at Cato's expense for a year, and then dispose of them. Many of these Cato retained in his own service, paying the price offered by the highest bidder, and deducting from it the original cost of the slave. When endeavoring to encourage his son to act in a similar manner, he used to say that it was not the part of a man, but of a lone woman, to diminish one's capital. And once, with an excessive exaggeration, he said that the most glorious and godlike man was he who on his death was bound to have earned more than he inherited. PG 122, XXII. When he was an old man, Carneades the academic, and Diogenes the Stoic philosopher, came as ambassadors to Rome on the part of the Athenians, to beg that they might not be forced to pay a fine of 500 talents which had been imposed upon them in consequence of an action at law, brought against the Athenians by the people of Porapis, before the people of Sicyon as judges, having been allowed to go against them by default. Such of the Roman youth as had any taste for literature frequented the society of these men, and took great interest in hearing their discussions. They were especially delighted with Carneades, a man of great and recognized ability, who obtained large and enthusiastic audiences at his lectures, and filled the whole city with his fame. Nothing was talked of except how a single Greek with wonderful powers of eloquence and persuasion had so bewitched the youth of Rome that they forsook all other pleasures, and plunged wildly into philosophic speculations. The greater part of the citizens were well pleased with this, and looked on with great satisfaction at their son's study of Greek literature, and their intimacy with such celebrated men. But Cato, when the taste for philosophy first sprang up in Rome, was vexed at it, and feared that the young men might become more eager to gain distinction by fluent speaking than by warlike exploits. However, when the fame of the philosophers increased, and a distinguished man, Caius Achilles, at the general request, translated their first lectures to the Senate, Cato decided that the philosophers must at once be conducted with all due honors out of the city. He came to the Senate and made a speech, in which he blamed them for having allowed the embassy to remain so long at Rome without accomplishing its purpose, although nothing was easier than for it to gain its point. He called upon them, therefore, to decide as soon as possible and come to a vote upon the matter about which this embassy was come, in order that these philosophers might return to their schools and instruct the young men of Greece, while those of Rome might, as before, give their attention to the laws and the magistrates. XXII Cato acted thus, not as some writers imagine, PG 123, from any private quarrel with Carneades, but because he disliked the philosophy altogether, and from a feeling of patriotism, regarded all Greek literature and methods of education with hatred and contempt. He used to say that Socrates was a worthy and dangerous man, who endeavored in his own way to make himself supreme in Athens, by destroying the best of the national customs and teaching the citizens to hold opinions at variance with the laws. He ridiculed Socrates as a teacher of rhetoric, saying that his disciples stayed with him so long learning their profession, that they were only able to practice what they had learned in the court and their minds sat as judge in the next world. In his endeavors to dissuade his son from the study of Greek literature, he abused the privileges of old age so far as to utter a prophecy that the Romans would ruin their empire by too intimate an acquaintance with the arts of Greece. Time, however, has proved this to be a mere empty slander, seeing that since then Rome has risen to the wonderful height of power and glory, and yet is thoroughly familiar with Greek writings and studies. Cato not only disliked the Greek philosophers, but also looked with suspicion on the Greek physicians who then practiced at Rome. He had heard some story about Hippocrates, who, when King of Persia offered him a large sum of money if he would come to Persia, answered that he never would give his services to barbarians who were the enemies of Greece. Cato used to say that all Greek physicians had sworn an oath to act like Hippocrates, and warned his son never to have any dealings with any of them. He himself had a book full of recipes, according to which he used to fight sick and regulate the diet of any who fell sick in his house, being careful never to allow the patient to fast, but making him eat salad, with ducks, pigeons, and hares, which he said were light food, and suitable for sick persons, except that it often happened that those who ate of them suffered from nightmares. He used to declare that by following this regimen, he kept both himself and all his household in perfect health. XXIV. He seems to have been justly rewarded for his quackery, for he lost both his wife and his son by sickness. PG 124, he himself, however, being of an iron constitution, made a second marriage, in spite of his advanced age, being led into it by the following circumstances. After the death of his wife, he arranged a marriage between his son and the daughter of Gaius Paulus, who was the sister of Scipio. He himself meanwhile solaced himself by an intrigue with a maidservant who visited him by stealth. However, in a small house with a daughter-in-law, this could not be kept secret. And one day when this woman was insolently swaggering into his father's bedchamber, young Cato was observed by the old man to glance at her with bitter hatred and then turn away in disgust. As soon as Cato perceived that his conduct vexed his children, he said not a word, but went into the forum with his friends, as was his wont. Here one Solonius, who was one of his under-secretaries, met him and began to pay his respects to him, when Cato asked him in a loud voice whether he had provided a husband for his daughter. On the man's replying that he had not, and would not presume to do so without consulting him, Cato replied, "Well, my Jupiter, have found a very suitable person to marry her, unless his age be any objection, for he is very passable in all respects except that he is very old." As Solonius upon this bade him carry out his intention and marry the girl to whomsoever he pleased, seeing that she was his client 31, and he was her patron, Cato without a moment's delay told him that he wished to marry the girl himself. This proposal at first, as might be expected, astonished the secretary, who had thought that a man at Cato's time of life was very unlikely to marry, and had never dreamed that his humble family would be allied with a house which could boast of consulates and triumphs. But as he saw that Cato was in earnest, he gladly accepted his offer. While the preparations for the marriage were in progress, young Cato, taking his relatives with him, went to inquire of his father whether he had reproached or annoyed him in any way, that he was putting the mother-in-law over him. Cato at this question cried out aloud, "Hush, my son! I approve of all that you have done, and find no fault with you. I only desire to leave behind me more sons of my race, and more citizens PG 125, to serve the state." It is said that this remark was first made by Pisistratus, the despot of Athens, when, although he had sons grown up, he married Timonassa of Argos, by whom we are told that he had two sons, Iophon and Thessalus. Cato also had a son by his second marriage, whom he named Solonius after his mother. His eldest son died during his praetorship. Cato often mentions him in his writings as having been a brave and good man, but is said to have borne his loss with philosophic resignation, and to have taken as keen an interest in politics as before. He did not, as was afterwards done by Lucius Lucullus or Metellus Caius, abandon public life when he grew old, and think that it was a burden to take part in politics. Still less did he imitate Scipio Africanus, who some years before had proudly turned his back on the people begrudged him the glory he had won, and spent the rest of his life in ease and retirement. Someone is said to have told Dionysius of Syracuse that an absolute monarchy is the best thing for a man to die in, and so Cato seemed to think that political life was the best for him to grow old in, while he amused himself in his leisure moments by writing and farming. XXV. He compiled works on various subjects, especially on history. Farming he applied himself to when very young, on account of his poverty, for he himself tells us that he had only two sources of income, farming and frugality. In later life he derived both amusements and instruction from watching the operations of agriculture, and he has written a farmer's manual, in which there is even an account of how to cook cakes and preserve fruits, so desirous was he to show a thorough knowledge of every subject. His table was never so well served as when he was in the country. For he used to invite all his friends and acquaintances from the neighborhood, and make himself very agreeable to them, as he was a pleasant companion not only to men of his own age, but also to the young, having in the course of his long life seen and heard from others much that was interesting and curious. He regarded the table as the best means of forming friendships, and when dining used to praise the good without stint, but never would allow the names of worthless men to be PG 126 mentioned, either by way of praise or blame, at his entertainments. XXVI. The last of his political acts is said to have been the destruction of Carthage. This was actually brought to pass by Scipio the Younger, but it was chiefly owing to the counsels of Cato that the war was begun. His reason for insisting on its destruction was this. He was sent on a mission to Africa to investigate the grounds of a quarrel which existed between the Carthaginians and Massinissa, the king of the Numidians. Massinissa had always been the friend of Rome, whereas the Carthaginians, after their defeat by Scipio, had been subjected to hard conditions, having lost their sovereignty over the neighboring tribes, and having been compelled to pay a large sum as tribute to Rome. Cato, however, found the city, not, as the Romans imagined it to be, crushed by its recent overthrow, but full of young men, overflowing with wealth, well provided with arms and munitions of war, and, as may be expected, full of warlike spirit. He concluded that it was no time for the Romans to arbitrate about the grievances of Massinissa and his Numidians, for that, unless they had once destroyed a city which bore them an undying hatred and which had recovered its strength in an incredibly short space of time, they would have as much to fear from Carthage as ever. He quickly returned home, and pointed out to the Senate that the former defeats and misfortunes suffered by the Carthaginians had not really broken their strength so much as they had dissipated their overweening self-confidence, and that in the late war they had not lost so much in strength as they had gained in experience and skill. Their present difference with the Numidians was, he urged, merely a prelude to an attack upon Rome, with which city they kept up the fiction of a peace which would soon upon a suitable opportunity be exchanged for war. XXVII. After these words it is said that Caleb threw down in the Senate house some ripe figs which he had brought on purpose. And when the senators admired their size and beauty, he remarked that the country which produced this fruit is only 3 days' sail distant from Rome. Another and more violent method of forcing PG 127, the Romans to attack them was his habit, when giving his opinion on any subject whatever, to append the words, and I also am of opinion that Carthage must be destroyed. On the other hand, Publius Scipio, called Nasicra, used to end all his speeches with the words, and I further am of opinion that Carthage should be left alone. Scipio's reason for this was that he perceived that the lower classes in Rome, elated by success, were becoming difficult for the Senate to manage, and practically forced the state to adopt whatever measures they chose. He thought that to have the sphere of Carthage kept constantly hanging over them would be a salutary check upon the insolence of the people, and he thought that although Carthage was too weak to conquer the Romans, yet that it was too strong to be despised by them. Cato, on the other hand, thought it a dangerous thing that, at a time when the Romans were giddy and drunk with power, they should leave in existence the city which always had been important, and which now, severed by defeat, was biding its time and lying in wait for a favorable opportunity to avenge itself. He argued that it was better to set the Romans free from any fear of foreign states, in order that they might be able to devote themselves uninterruptedly to the task of political reform. These are said to have been Cato's reasons for urging his countrymen to begin the third and last Punic War. He died as soon as the war was begun, leaving a prophecy that it would be finished by a young man who was then serving as military tribune, and who had given remarkable proofs of courage and generalship. Cato, on hearing of his exploits, is said to have quoted Homer's line, "He alone has solid wisdom. All the rest are shadows vain." This opinion Scipio soon confirmed by his actions. Cato left one son by his second wife, who, as has been said, was named Salonius, and one grandson, the child of his eldest son who was dead. Salonius died during his warship, but his son Marcus became consul. This man was the grandfather of Cato the philosopher, who was one of the foremost men of his day in courage and ability. Footnotes: 26, C.F. Livy, XXIXCH. 19, SQQ. 27, C. Vogt. I, Life of Themistocles, CH. X. 28, victors were attended scrambled to Roman magistrates as a mark of official dignity. C. Vogt. I, Life of Romulus, CHXXVI. 29, Spain was divided by the Romans into 2 provinces, of which the south was that which was nearer to Rome. 30, the inhabitants of the town of Firmum, in Picenum. Now Firmo. 31, on the nature of these relations, see Smith's Dict. Event, SV. PG 128 comparison of Aristides and Cato. Now that we have related all the important events of each of these men's lives, it will be seen that the points in which they differ are very trifling when compared with those in which they agree. If, however, we are to take each of their qualities separately, as one would in comparing 2 speeches or 2 pictures, we observe that they both agree in having even life in a humble station, and having one political distinction and power by sheer ability and force of character. It is true that Aristides rose to power at a period when Athens was poor, and when the orders and generals whom he attacked were men whose means were little superior to his own. For the men of greatest incomes at that time were assessed as having 500 bushels of wet or dry produce a year, while the next class, that of the knights, had 300, and the lowest, or those who could afford to keep a yoke of oxen, had only 200. Cato, on the other hand, came from an obscure village in a rustic mode of life, and boldly launched himself upon the turbid sea of Roman politics. Although the days of Curius, Fabricius and Achilles were long past, and Rome was not accustomed to find her magistrates and party leaders in laboring men fresh from the plow or the workshop, but in men of noble birth and great wealth, who could invest extensively, and bribe heavily. While the populace, insolent with the consciousness of power, were growing ripe for a revolt against the governing class. It was a very different thing for Aristides to have only Themistocles for an antagonist, a man of no birth or fortune, for it is said that he only possessed between 3 and 5 talents when he first embarked on politics, and PG 129, for Cato to contend for the mastery with men like Scipio Africanus, Sergius Galba, and Titus Quinius Flamininus, with nothing to help him but his eloquent voice and his good cause. Aye. Furthermore, Aristides, both at Marathon and at Plaid, acted as general with 9 colleagues, while Cato was elected one of the 2 consuls and afterwards one of the 2 censors, though there were many other candidates for both offices. Aristides never conspicuously distinguished himself, as the credit of the victory at Marathon belongs to Miltiades, and that of Salamis to Themistocles, while Herodotus tells us that Pausanias obtained the most glorious success of all at that, and even the second place is disputed with Aristides by Sophanes, Aminas, Callimachus, and Cnidus, all of whom won great glory in those battles. On the other hand, Cato not only when consul gained the greatest credit, both by his wise conduct and his personal prowess in the Spanish War, but when at Thermopylae he was acting as tribune under another person's command as consul, contributed mainly to winning the victory by his flank movement, by which he established himself in the rear of Antiochus while that prince was intent upon the enemy in his front. This victory, which was so manifestly due to Cato, had the important result of driving the Asiatic troops out of Greece back to their own country, and so preparing the way for Scipio's subsequent invasion of Asia. Neither of them were ever defeated in battle, but in political matters Aristides was overcome by his rival Themistocles, who drove him into exile by ostracism, while Cato held his own against all the greatest and most influential men in Rome to the end of his life without once being overthrown by them. He was often impeached, and always acquitted, while he frequently succeeded in his impeachments of others, using, both as a bulwark to defend himself and as a weapon to attack others, his power of speaking in public, which indeed is a quality more to be relied upon than good fortune to protect a man from suffering wrong. Antipater, in the account which he wrote of the philosopher Aristotle after his death, observes pg 130, that besides his other qualities and accomplishments this man had the power of persuasion. It is generally admitted that political virtue is the highest to which a man can aspire, and of this, most think domestic virtue to be a very important part. For as a city is merely a collection of houses, the public virtue of the state must be increased to contain many well-regulated households. Lycurgus, when he banished silver and gold from Sparta, and gave his countrymen useless iron money, did not wish to discourage good household management among them, but he removed the dangerous seductions of wealth out of their reach, in order that they all might enjoy a sufficiency of what was useful and necessary. He saw, what no other legislator appears to have seen, that the real danger to a commonwealth arises from the poor and desperate rather than from the excessively rich. Now we have seen that Cato was as well able to manage his household as to govern the state. For he improved his fortune and became a teacher of household management and husbandry to others, by collecting much useful information on these matters. On the other hand, Aristides made his poverty a reproach to justice, which by his example was made to seem a ruinous virtue which brought men to want, and was totally useless to those who practiced it. Epicurus, when encouraging men to act justly and manage their household affairs well, blames idleness as the origin of injustice, and the same idea is well stated in Homer's lines. Work was never my delight, nor household cares, that breed up children bright. But ever loved I ships with banks of oars, and arrows keen, and weapons for the wars, where we see that the same men neglect their duties at home, and gain their living by injustice and piracy abroad. The physicians tell us that oil is most useful, outwardly used, and most harmful when taken inwardly. But it is not true of the just man that he is most useful to his friends, but useless to himself. It seems to me to be a blot on Aristides' fame, if it be true that he could not even provide money for his daughter's dowry or for pg 131, his own funeral expenses. The family of Cato for 4 generations supplied Rome with curars and consuls for his grandchildren, and their children too, all those to the highest offices in the state. While the hopeless poverty of Aristides, though he was the foremost man of his time in Greece, reduced some of his family to the disreputable profession of interpreting dreams, and forced others to live on public charity, putting it quite out of their power to emulate the glorious actions of their ancestor. Some, indeed, may dispute this. For it is true that poverty is no disgrace in itself, but only when it is a proof of indolence, extravagance, or folly. The poverty of a laborious, upright, temperate statesman combines well with his other virtues, and shows true greatness of mind, for a man whose attention is given to little things, can never succeed in doing great ones. Nor can a man help others if he is in need of help himself. A statesman requires, not wealth, but contentment, in order that his attention may not be diverted from public affairs by his own cravings for useless luxuries. God alone is entirely without wants, and we approach nearest to the divine ideal when we can reduce our wants to the fewest possible. Just as a healthy man requires neither excess of clothing or of food, so a man's life and that of his family, if properly regulated, can be maintained at a trifling cost. His income, however, must exactly tally with his requirements. For we cannot call that man contented who earns much, and spends little. He is a foolish man if he troubles himself to amass what he cannot enjoy. While he must be a miserable man if he is able to enjoy the use of wealth, and yet through meanness of spirit forbids himself its use. I would willingly put this question to Cato: if we ought to enjoy our wealth, why do you make a virtue of simplicity of living when you are a rich man? If, on the other hand, it is a noble thing, as no doubt it is, to eat common bread, to drink the same wine as our servants and farm laborers do, and not to want fine clothes or comfortable houses, then Aristides and Epaminondas, Manius Curius and Caius Fabricius were to be applauded for their neglect of the wealth, whose use they rejected. pg 132, surely it was not necessary for a man who thought turnips made a delicious meal, and who used to boil them himself while his wife baked the bread, to write so much about how to save a penny, and how a man might most quickly make a fortune. The great advantage of simplicity and containment is, that it prevents our wishing for superfluities, or even thinking about them. Aristides, when cited as a witness during the trial of Callias, is said to have observed that those who were poor against their will, ought to be ashamed of it, but that those who, like himself, were poor from their own choice, gloried in their poverty. It would be absurd to suppose that the poverty of Aristides was not voluntary, when, without doing any criminal act, he might by stripping the body of one dead person, or by plundering one tent, have made himself a rich man. But enough of this. As to their campaigns, those of Cato added but little to the already vast empire of Rome, while Aristides was present at Marathon, Salamis, in fact, the most glorious of all Grecian victories. We cannot compare Antiochus with Xerxes, nor the destruction of the walls of the Spanish cities by Cato, with the tremendous slaughter of the barbarians by the Greeks, both on sea and land. Aristides was present at every action of importance, although he gave up a share of glory and rewards, even as he did with gold and silver, to those who needed them more than himself. I cannot blame Cato for always glorifying himself and claiming the first place for himself, although he says in one of his books that it is absurd for a man either to praise or to blame himself. Still, I think that he who does not even wish for the praises of others is a more perfect character than he who is always exalting himself. An indifference to popular applause does much to soften the bitterness of political controversy, while on the other hand a love of distinction often leads men to be ill-natured and spiteful to others, a fault which Aristides entirely avoided, and which Cato was peculiarly liable. Aristides saved Athens by supporting the authority of Themistocles on several critical occasions, and even acting as a subordinate. While Cato by his opposition nearly ruined Scipio's famous expedition to Carthage, in which pg 133, he defeated hitherto invincible Hannibal. Nor did he cease his intrigues against Scipio until by calumnies and false accusations he drove him out of Rome, and stigmatized his brother with a disgraceful charge of embezzling the public money. Self-denial, upon which Cato has bestowed such lavish praise, was practiced in its purest and brightest form by Aristides, while Cato seems to have forfeited all claim to this virtue by his unsuitable and unseasonable second marriage. It could not be to his honor, when he was of such a great age, to marry the daughter of his own servant, a man who acted as a public clerk, and to bring her into the house to act as mother-in-law to his son, who was now himself grown up and married. Whether he acted thus from natural inclination, or to spite his son for his behavior about his mistress, the marriage and the motives which led to it are equally discreditable to him. The sarcastic explanation of it which he gave to his son is utterly untrue. For had he wished to beget other children as noble as his son, he ought to have married a well-born lady at once, and not to have been satisfied with a low intrigue until it was detected, and then to have chosen as his father-in-law the man whom he could most easily influence, rather than someone whose alliance would bring him honor and advantage. PG 134 Life of Philip N. I. In the city of Mantinea there was a citizen named Cleander, of one of the first families, and of great influence. Nevertheless he was so unfortunate as to be forced to leave his native city, and take refuge in Megalopolis, to which he was chiefly attracted by Colchis, the father of Philip N, a man eminent in every respect, and an especial private friend of Cleander. While Colchis lived, Cleander wanted for nothing, and after his death endeavored to repay the debt which he owed him by devoting himself to the education of his orphan son, just as Homer tells us that Achilles was nurtured by the Exarchaeachics. The child, who always was of a noble and commanding spirit, grew under his care into a youth of great promise. As he came near to manhood Ecdipus and Megalophanes, 2 citizens of Megalopolis, took charge of his education. These men had studied in the academy with Arcesi laws, and more than any others brought the lessons of philosophy to bear upon politics and the daily affairs of life. They freed their own country of the desperate Aristides by secretly contriving his assassination, drove out the desperate Nicopolis from Sicyon, with the help of Perdiccas, and, at the request of the people of Cyrene, whose state was a prey to revolution, they went to that country and restored order and respect for the laws. They themselves, however, reckoned the most important work to have been the education of Philip N, because by bringing him up in the precepts of true philosophy they made him a benefactor to all Greece. And truly Greece loved him exceedingly, as the last great man born of her old age, after so many great and famous men of former times. A Roman speaking in this phrase called PG 135, him the last of the Greeks, as though he thought that Greece had never after him produced any son worthy of herself. Aye. His appearance was not repulsive, as some think. For we can see the statue of him which exists at Delphi this day. The mistake of his Megarian hostess seems to have arisen from his good nature and simplicity. She, when she heard that the commander-in-chief of the Arch-NS was coming to the house, was in a great state of excitement about the preparation of dinner, her husband happening to be away. Meanwhile, Philip N. dressed in a coarse cloak, and she, supposing him to be a servant sent on in advance, ordered him to help her to get things ready. He at once threw off his cloak and began to split up firewood. While he was thus engaged, his friend the master of the house came in, and seeing him, said, "What is this that you are doing, Philip N.?" "Why," answered he in the Doric dialect, "I am suffering for my ugly face." Titus, also, when jesting upon his bodily shape, said, "Philip N., what fine hands and legs you have! But you have no belly, as indeed he had a very small waist." However, the jest was directed more against his power, for though he had plenty of good infantry and cavalry, he was frequently in great distress or of money to pay them. These are the common anecdotes which were current about Philip N. Aye. His love of distinction was not entirely unmixed with feelings of rivalry and passion. He desired to emulate the fame of Epaminondas, but though he imitated that great man in energy, good sense, and contempt of money, yet he was unable in political struggles to maintain his calm, unruffled good nature, but was often betrayed by his fiery temper into sallies more befitting a soldier than a statesman. Indeed, from a child he had always been fond of war, and eagerly devoted himself to soldier-like exercises, such as fighting in complete armor and riding on horseback. He was thought to be a good wrestler, and was invited by his friends to contend with them in that sport, but he asked them whether the practice would not impair his efficiency as a soldier, when they answered truly that the body and the life of PG 136 the athlete differs from that of a soldier in every respect, more particularly in diet and exercise. The athlete takes long sleep, frequent meals, regular exercise and intervals of rest, being likely to be put out of condition by the least change of his accustomed routine, while the life of a soldier makes him accustomed to all kinds of change and diversity of life, especially when feeling hunger and want of sleep. On learning this, Philip N. not only himself avoided wrestling and ridiculed it, but when he was in command of an army took every means in his power to bring every kind of athletic exercise into contempt, as likely to unfit the best men's bodies for the most important struggles in battle. IV. On leaving his schoolmasters he took part in the incursion made by his fellow citizens into the Laconian territory for the purpose of plunder. In these raids it was his wont always to be first in the attack, and last in the retreat. In time of peace he would exercise his body, and make it both swift and strong, either by hunting or by tilling the ground. He possessed a fine estate about 20 furlongs from the city. To this he would walk after his morning or evening meal, and sleep there on any bed he could find, like one of the farm laborers. Then he would rise early, help the vine dressers or cattle herds to do their work, and, returning to town, take part in public business. The profits arising from the plunder gained and the poise he used to spend on horses, arms, and the redeeming of captives, while he endeavored to increase his income by the skillful cultivation of his farm, considering the most just way of making money, and his strict duty to be, so to manage his fortune as to avoid the temptation of wronging others. He used to listen to conversation and to read treatises upon philosophy, yet not all, but only those which he thought would teach him to be virtuous. He also devoted much time to reading those passages at Homer which stir up and excite manly courage. His other reading consisted chiefly of Evangelus's treatise on military tactics, and of the history of Alexander the Great. But he always thought that reading, unless it led to action, was a useless waste of time. In his studies of tactics he used to disregard the diagrams in the books PG 137, and consider what could be done in the field itself, observing the slopes and inequalities of the ground, the direction of brooks and water courses, and the effect which they would have upon a body of troops advancing in line or in column. These reflections he was wont to make during his walks, and to exercise the minds of his companions by questions about them. For he devoted his whole mind to the study of military matters, regarding war as the widest arena for the display of virtue, utterly despising those who were not soldiers, as useless members of society. 3. When he was 30 years old, Cleomenes, the king of the Lacedaemonians, made a night attack upon Megalopolis, forced his way through the guard on the wall and reached the marketplace. Philip came to the rescue, but was not able to dislodge the enemy, although he assaulted them with the greatest spirit. However, he gave time for the citizens to leave the town, while he bore the whole brunt of the attack of Cleomenes, so that at last he had great difficulty in extricating himself, as he had lost his horse and was wounded. The citizens of Megalopolis escaped to Messene, where the Cleomenes sent to offer them their town and territory again. Philip, when he saw his fellow citizens eager to embrace this offer, restrained them from accepting it by pointing out that Cleomenes did not really offer them their city back again, but meant to get the citizens as well into his power, in order to be able to hold it more securely for the future. Because he could not remove the guarding naked walls and empty houses, but would be compelled to leave them and go his way. By these arguments he withheld the Megalopolitans from coming to terms, but gave Cleomenes a pretext for destroying a great part of the city, and carrying away a great booty from it. 9. When King Antigonus sometime after destroying the Archaean forces in a campaign against Cleomenes, they came upon his army advantageously posted so as to command the defiles near Saletta. Philip was among the cavalry that day with his fellow citizens, and next to him were posted the Illyrians, numerous and warlike, who covered the flank of the allies. Their orders were to remain in reserve until they saw a red flag raised upon PG-138, hiked by King Antigonus on the other wing. The generals of the allies attacked the Lacedaemonians with the Illyrian troops, but Eacles, the brother of Cleomenes, perceiving that by this movement the foot were completely severed from the horse, sent the swiftest of his light-armed troops to outflank them and cut them off. When this was done, and the Illyrians were thrown into great disorder, Philip saw that the cavalry could charge the Lacedaemonian light troops with great effect, and pointed this out to Antigonus' generals. Meeting with a scornful refusal, as his reputation was not yet sufficiently great to warrant his suggesting such an angry, he collected his own fellow countrymen and charged with him alone. At the first onset he threw the light-armed troops into confusion, and presently routed them with great slaughter. Wishing to encourage the allies and to come more quickly to blows with the retreating enemy, he dismounted, and with great difficulty, encumbered by his heavy horseman's cuirass and accoutrements, pursued over a rough piece of ground full of watered horses and precipitous rocks. While struggling over these obstacles, he was struck through both eyes by a javelin with a strap attached to it, a wound which was not dangerous, though the javelin struck him with such force as to drive the iron head quite through. This wound for the time rendered him helpless, as it bound both his legs as if with a chain, while the strap made it hard to pull the javelin out again through the wound. As his friends hesitated, not knowing what to do, while the battle now at its height excited his courage, and made him long to take part in it, he violently strained one leg forward and the other back, so as to break the javelin in the middle, after which the pieces were pulled out. Being thus set free, he drew his sword, ran through the first of the combatants and attacked the enemy, animating all his men and setting them on fire with emulation. After the victory was won, Antigonus inquired of the Macedonians why the cavalry had charged without orders. They answered that they were forced to charge against them by a young citizen of Megalopolis, who attacked on his own account. Antigonus smiled, and answered that the young man acted like a veteran commander. PG-139, VII. Philip, as may be supposed, gained great glory by this action. Antigonus was eager to obtain the services, and offered him a command at high pay, but he excused himself, knowing that his temper would not endure to be under the orders of another man. Still, as he could not be idle, he sailed for Crete to serve a campaign there, in order to gain experience of war. He spent a considerable time there, living amongst the warlike, sober, and tempered men, and returned to the Archaeans with so great a reputation that they had once put him in command of the knights. These horsemen, he found, were in the habit of using any chance horses they could pick up when required for a campaign, while in many cases they did not serve in person, but sent substitutes. They were entirely without discipline or bravery, while all this was passed over unnoticed by the commanders, because the knights were the most influential men among the Archaeans, and were able to promote or degrade whom they pleased. Philip, however, could not allow this state of things to continue. He went round to each of the cities of the Archaean League, and by personally appealing to the young men's sense of honor, by punishment where it was necessary, and by careful training, exercises, and contests among them before as many spectators as possible, in a short time produced great efficiency and military spirit. He made them quick at man bring in squadrons, and in wheeling round and managing their horses, which is so valuable a quality in cavalry soldiers, and taught the whole body to move with ease at the will of one man. Once during a severe battle with the Hellenes and Oleans on the banks of the river Larissa, Damathantus, the commander of the Hellene horse, rode furiously to attack Philip. He awaited Damathantus' onset, and with his spear thrust him from the saddle. When he found the Hellenes at once turned and fled, to the great glory of Philip, who had proved himself as brave as the youngest or as skillful as the oldest soldier, equally able to fight or to command. The Archaean League was first organized by Aratus, who formed its scattered and despicable cities into a noble and truly Greek commonwealth. Then, as in PG-140, running streams, when first a few small stones resist the flow of the water, soon much more is brought down by the stream and lodged against them until a firm ground is formed. So did the Archaeans, by assisting some of the neighboring cities in freeing them from despots, and by uniting and incorporating others with themselves, endeavored to combine the whole of Peloponnesus into one single state, at a time when Greece was especially weak, having lost all cohesion, each city relying solely on itself. While Aratus lived, they depended much on the Macedonians, quoting first Ptolemy, then Antigonus and Philip, for all were constantly interfering in the affairs of Greece. But when Philip came to command, they already felt themselves a match for the most powerful states, and no longer paid their court to foreign patrons. Aratus, who was no soldier, had effected most of his successes by suave diplomacy and personal friendship with foreign princes, as we have written in his life, but Philip, a brave and vigorous, and, what is more, an eminently successful commander in his first essays, greatly raised the spirit and the strength of the Archaeans, by making them confident of victory under his leadership. Aias,